I'm embarking on a project to review a book. Not just review it, but attempt to get at the nebulous meaning of it all. What it's got to say, what questions it asks us, and why I find it so personally impactful. For this project, I have chosen to start with Tehanu by Ursula K. Guin, a book in the middle of her Earthsea cycle and one that I come back to time and time again. I'd like to return to it with fresh eyes and really sink into it. Some content warnings for this video. So this book and my discussion of it will contain mention of the following: child abuse, rape, sexism, racism, ageism. None of these are gratuitous or exploitative. In my personal opinion, they are not only handled with the utmost empathy, they are integral aspects of the book, which asks us how we live in a world where these things happen, interrogates the structures of power and domination that engender these violations, and then proceeds to guide us gently to a place of hopeful understanding. If you are not in a place where you want to engage with these topics, I completely understand. The first thing I did for this project was to pick up my battered copy with the cover art I'm not all that fond of, and just read the first page to kickstart my memories. Side note, the first copy I ever read of this book was from the library, and the cover art for that edition was illustrated by Margaret Chodos Irvine. I'll put it on the screen here. I still think it looks so cool. Anyways, I jotted down some of the things I thought and felt while reflecting on this book before actually starting my fresh read. The first note I wrote on the page was simple. 2 words: overwhelming fondness. From there, we have the following pre-reread thoughts. The main character? I love her. Old women are amazing. Women are amazing. Next note. Aging characters, watching youthful heroes grow old and navigating a stage of life that is almost invisible in media. Next note. The impact of revisiting a character I watched overcome her traumatizing youth in her own adventure story years later as an elderly woman and her life not being over. One of the reasons I have such a strong bond with this book is that at the time I first read it, I couldn't imagine a life past 30. I had my own cocktail of traumatic childhood and mental illness to deal with, and this was really the first ray of light that ever pierced through that thick sludge. This was the first time I saw a depiction of someone I emotionally related to, who I could see myself in, truly grow and age and live. Not just her one arc as a youth, but into adulthood and old age. Something just blossomed in me at that. She's such a wonderful, practical, smart, brave, and kind human, just really lived quite the life, and old age is just a part of that cycle. And I'd never seen it explored with this kind of curiosity or love. So, Tanar, I love her. Tanar rules. Next note is just all capital letters with 4 exclamation points. Theru. There is this one quote from the book that I never quite remember, but I constantly think about and feel resonating in my bones. I'm excited to read it again and actually see what it is and go, hell yeah, dude. It's something along the lines of, there are some wrongs that can never be made right, they must be transcended. Spoiler, I fucked that quote up, as we will see later. So Theru is a little girl who has begun life in incredibly awful circumstances. A child who has had unspeakable abuse inflicted upon her by adults who should have cared for her, and has been left burned and broken on the side of the road. When your life starts so cruelly, can you be saved? Can you adjust to anything else? Can you find peace? Where is the justice for those who have done no wrong, yet have heinous acts committed against them? How do you deal with how fucked up the world is, Ursula? Ursula, tell me, please. And, in her own roundabout way, I think that is exactly what she does with Tehanu. After a brief bit of context, I'd like to go through the book chapter by chapter, discuss my thoughts upon finishing this reread, and then dive into some deeper analysis. For those of you who have not read this book and plan to do so, this is your spoiler warning. Let's get into it. Tehanu, published in 1990, shout out 90s kids, is the fourth book in Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea cycle. Originally planned to be a standalone book and then later a trilogy, Le Guin revisited the series 18 years later, feeling the need to tell more of the story. The first book of the series is A Wizard of Earthsea, published in 1968. It focuses on the non-traditional coming-of-age story of the wizard Sparrowhawk from the island of Gaunt as he learns about power, mortality, and balance while he travels the archipelago of Earthsea. In this book, we learn one of the defining standout decisions Le Guin made when writing this series. Almost everyone in Earthsea is brown. Tanar, a character from the barbaric Kargad lands, who we meet in the second book, is white, and this is very, very strange to most characters. Le Guin purposely chose to make it undeniably clear that the hero of the first book of Earthsea, the character Sparrowhawk, is dark-skinned. Le Guin was keenly aware of the ways real-world racism played out in the realms of fiction and publishing, and the ways this presentation reinforced white supremacy. She saw how fantasy stories seem to feature by default predominantly white characters, especially as heroes and protagonists, and purposely chose to write a series where that wasn't the case. In the afterword to A Wizard of Earthsea, Le Guin writes that she knew a great many white readers in 1967 were not ready to accept a brown-skinned hero. She goes on to say, "I was bucking the racist tradition, making a statement, but I made it quietly, and it went almost unnoticed. Alas, I had no power at that time to combat the flat refusal of many cover departments to put people of color on the book jacket. She had to fight to get accurate, not whitewashed, illustrations and depictions of Earthsea, and unfortunately was not always successful." In an interview discussing the 2004-2005 American TV miniseries adaptation titled Earthsea, Le Guin criticized the decision to make the character Ogion the only non-white man in the whole archipelago. They'd poured Clorox on all the others. In the second book in the series, The Tombs of Atuan, published in 1971, we meet the character Tanar in the Kargad lands, where she is taken as a child to be the priestess of the Tombs of Atuan, a position of great power forced upon her which shackles her to a life of namelessness, isolation, and service to the dark. Underneath the tombs, Tanar meets an imprisoned Sparrowhawk, waylaid on his adventure and trapped there. Together, the two escape, something that is only possible when Tanar discovers her power of choice. To use her own power to choose to let Sparrowhawk live, to choose to question her circumstances, and to refuse the borrowed power given to her by her role to perpetuate a cycle of domination. Le Guin had not intended to revisit the world of Earthsea, but she felt the need to explore what had been lacking in the more conventional fantasy tale, A Wizard of Earthsea, where, in her words, the hero does what a man is supposed to do. He uses his strengths, wits, and courage to rise from humble beginnings to great fame and power in a world where women are secondary, a man's world. The first book of Earthsea follows Sparrowhawk seeking out power and learning to find balance with himself after his hubris leads to harm. The second book follows Tanar on the journey to free herself from the power that imprisons her, an arbitrary power that gives her immense authority over others, but denies her all else. The third book of Earthsea, published in 1972, is The Farthest Shore. It continues the story of Sparrowhawk decades later, as he travels with the then prince/future king of Havnor, Lebanon, to the land of the dead to right a wrong he unleashed as a young, power-hungry boy. In order to stop the resurgence of the dark, immortality-obsessed Mage Cobb, Sparrowhawk sacrifices all of his power. The dragon Kalesin returns him to his home island of Gaunt, where this story ends. And this leads us finally to the fourth book in the series, Tehanu, which, although written 18 years later, picks up during and right after the events of The Farthest Shore. And you may find yourself asking, why am I starting with the fourth book in the series? And the answer is because it's my video essay and I can do what I want to, and what I need to do is talk about Tehanu. Like, so bad I need to talk about it, like so bad. So thank you for this opportunity. Now what I'd like to do is go through Tehanu chapter by chapter. We're gonna just go through it. This is really the point where if you do find yourself interested in reading this book for the first time, please do so now. This is going to be just total spoiling territory because I really need to talk about Tehanu. So this is your final warning. Spoilers. Chapter 1. A Bad Thing. The book begins with the name of a man, Farmer Flint, and the description of his widow. She has a name from her own home country, but Flint gave her the name Goha, a name she shares with a white, web-spinning spider. It becomes clear that this foreign woman, now the mother of 2 adult children and the widow of Farmer Flint, is Tanar, the protagonist of the Tombs of Atuan and former priestess of the Nameless One. It feels quite shocking to be reintroduced to her in such a common manner. Although many characters in Earthsea have multiple names for the sake of clarity, I will be using the name Tanar from here on out to discuss this character. Tanar's friend and neighbor Lark comes to tell her of a badly abused, burned child, an underweight girl that can't be more than 6 or 7. Lark asks Tanar for help, desperately searching for anything to help save the child, whose right side of the face and head and the right hand had been charred to the bone. Currently, she is in the care of Ivy, a witch. Tanar and Lark struggle to witness such cruelty done to one so young, and comfort each other. Tanar visits the child's bedside, takes her unburnt hand in hers, and vows that she will not let the dark take her. The child struggles to breathe. Chapter 2. Going to the Falcon's Nest. A year passes. At her home at Oak Farm, Tanar receives a message sent by the Mage of Rayalby, her former teacher and guardian, Ogi. He is ill, possibly dying, and requests to see her one last time. As soon as she is prepared, Tanar sets off to make the journey to Ogion's with a quiet, burned child in tow, whom she calls Theru. Tanar passes the time walking by telling Theru stories that Ogion used to tell her when she was a child under his care. Tales of wizards changing into animals and forgetting they were ever human, and tales of the little village of Kamei, where there lived an old woman who was also a dragon. This story is the first time the relationship between dragons, humans, and wizards is discussed. According to the lore, dragons were the first. Some dragons chose to become humans, and the humans who retained some of their original forms' magic became mages. However, legend has it that there are some who never became fully human, or stayed fully dragon, but rather existed as both human and dragon, inseparably. Tanar and Theru encounter 4 traveling men who present an unknown and immediate threat. In recent years, it seems like interactions with strangers have become riskier, danger more present, and peace more difficult to cultivate on the island of Guin where they live. Tanar steels herself and successfully passes by the men who very much seem to have ill intent, though they make no move to act on it. The 2 make it to Ogion's house, where he welcomes them in. Chapter 3. Ogion. Ogion is dying. We learn about naming conventions in Earthsea, how wizards often bestow one's true name in the language of the making when one is old enough, how usenames are so common because using someone's true name is not just intimate but powerful, Tanar has had many names and many titles. She has been Arha, the Eaten One and Priestess of the Tombs, Goha, Flint's widow, and Tanar, the name her mother gave her. We learn that in Tanar's native language of Kargish, Theru, the name she gave the child, means burning, the flaming of fire. Ogion and Tanar discuss the difficult path Theru has in front of her, how the people will fear her for her physical scarring, the abuse done to her, and her strange, quiet nature. Ogion begs Tanar to teach her all, not Roke. Ogion does not wish to die indoors, so Tanar helps him walk to the forest. He tells Tanar his true name and dies, cradled by the roots of a great beech tree. We then meet the unmarried and unwashed witch, Antimos, who comes to perform Ogion's burial rites. The wizards of Rayalbi and Gauntport also visit to pay their respects to the great mage. However, they are quite rude and dismissive to Antimos's ministrations. They argue about who will have the honor of burying Ogion in their respective lands, and lament that he will die nameless. Tanar has had enough of this nonsense. She expresses Ogion's desire to be buried here at his home, and that he shared his true name before death, Ihal. Seeing not the complex woman we know, but rather just Flint's widow, a middle-aged village woman, the two wizards immediately rebuke her. Take care, woman, how you speak to men of power. Unshaken, perhaps no longer surprised by this sort of thing, Tanar realizes that the two wizards hadn't even bothered to listen to her relay Ogion's true name to them. She kindly repeats it. Chapter 4. Kalessin. Tanar stays to look after Ogion's house and farm. Theru plants a peach seed. The way Le Guin writes about it makes me go kind of feral, so I'm going to read the whole paragraph. The child chose a place and dug the tiny grave. She had laid the stone in it and covered it over. Tanar watched her. In the few days they had been living here, Theru had changed, she thought. She was still unresponsive, without anger, without joy. But since they had been here, her awful vigilance, her immobility, had almost imperceptibly relaxed. She had desired the peaches. She had thought of planting the stone, of increasing the number of peaches in the world. Good shit. Tanar reflects on her past, how it was shaped by power. The power of others, the nameless forces of the tombs or magic-wielding men like Sparrowhawk and Ogion. She remembers her choice to leave both of these worlds behind and seek out the other side, the other room where the women lived, to be one of them. A choice to relinquish the power of her association with magery and men, to go marry a farmer and raise children, to be a wife, mother, and widow. She has had many names and many roles. What is her role now? What is left for her here? Antimos takes a liking to Theru. The two spend a lot of time together with Antimos, teaching her various skills and telling her stories. Theru is quiet but comfortable in her presence. On the cliffs above Ogion's farm, Tanar encounters a dragon. These creatures are legend. They are magic itself, creation, power. To glimpse one is a wonder. To speak to one, that is a rare gift. Those that can understand the language of dragons, who can speak it, who will be heard by a dragon, they are known as dragon lords. Few men have earned this title, one among them being Sparrowhawk. It is one of many reasons he ascended to the rank of Archmage so quickly, and evidence of his great power. The dragon lands on the cliffside, a great creature breathing out gusts of flame. It brings upon its back an injured and unresponsive man, Sparrowhawk. The dragon speaks to Tanar and tells her its name, Kalessin. Tanar, in turn, tells Kalessin her name. With some difficulty, she removes Sparrowhawk from Kalessin's back and the dragon flies away into the west. Auntie Moss and the goatherd Heather help Tanar bring Sparrowhawk inside and tuck him into Ogion's old bed. One striking thing is clear immediately to Auntie Moss. This man, whoever he may be, is certainly not a mage. Tanar, however, knows him, knows his true name, Ged, which Kalesman also used. Sparrowhawk, Ged, the Archmage of Roke, is a mage no longer. Chapter 5. Bettering. Tanar thinks about her 2 children, now adults, her daughter Apple, who lives in the Middle Valley with her family, and her son Spark, who makes his dubiously legal living as a sailor. Flint's property is now legally her son's, but he spends his time at sea and rarely comes home. He may not even know of his father's death. Auntie Moss and Tanar have a conversation about men and women. Auntie Moss has a contemptuous, if understandable, view of men, and takes refuge in her belief that the power of woman is mysterious and ineffable, that a woman's power is deeper than the roots of trees, deeper than the roots of islands, older than the making, older than the moon. I go back into the dark, she says. No one knows. No one knows. No one can say what I am, what a woman is. Tanar has some doubts about this philosophy, having had quite enough of a life in the dark herself. In regards to the healing Sparrowhawk, Auntie Moss is of the opinion that a man without power or a mage without magic is akin to an empty shell. Sparrowhawk wakes and slowly begins to mend, physically if not mentally. Tanar notes that it has been 25 years since their adventures out of Atuan. He easily falls in sync with Tanar domestically. He helps to cook and clean, surprising her with his lack of concern for engaging in so-called women's work. The ease with which he does the dishes interests her. She had been comparing him to Flint, but Flint had never washed a dish in his life. Women's work. He did the women's work and thought nothing about it. It would be a pity if he did think about it, if he started fearing that his dignity hung by a dishcloth. Tanar and Sparrowhawk reminisce about their grand adventure those 25 years ago, while they weed the onion patch together. Chapter 6. Worsening. Despair slowly and inexorably creeps into the minds of Sparrowhawk and Tanar. He takes to wandering the forest alone, trying to process his great loss, the loss of what he thought himself entirely to be, wallowing in obstinate misery. She agonizes over the cruelty done to Theru, the irremediable loss, the healing that would never be whole, and questions whether it would have been kinder to let the child die. Holding a sleeping Theru in her arms, Tanar asks, what wrong could she be? Wronged beyond all repair, but not wrong, not lost. Her heart breaks with the inability to fix Theru. There is no fixing, no righting of this grievous wrong, but she knows that letting this child die would have been even worse. She can only do that which she can do in the midst of great suffering. Care for Theru, teach her, and love her. Chapter 7. Mice. A ship from the capital, Havnor, arrives at Gauntport carrying a contingent of the king's men. Sparrowhawk reacts to this news with terror. He knows that men looking for the Archmage of Roke will be on that boat, and he cannot bear to face them. Just as he feared, the men search him out, but thanks to the efforts of Auntie Moss, Theru, and Tanar, he remains hidden. Chapter 8. Hawks. Sparrowhawk decides to leave for a while to avoid the king's men and to nurse his shame and solitude. He goes further into the country to look for seasonal work as a goatherd, an occupation far from that of Archmage, but one that he performed in his youth. Tanar does not understand it, why he feels such shame, but supposes it is because he thinks that he should have died when he lost his wizardry. Auntie Moss and Tanar have a conversation about the celibacy of mages, and continue ruminating on the differences between men, women, and the power they wield. It seems to me we make up most of the differences and then complain about them, concludes Tanar. Tanar goes by herself into town to visit with neighbors and procure cloth to make a dress for Theru. She wants the child to have something vibrant and pretty. On her walk, Theru remains in her thoughts, and it is here she thinks the line that I never remember correctly, but which makes me lose my freaking mind every time I read it, the line that I think truly represents this book if I had to pick just one sentence. On her way to buy cloth to make Theru a pretty dress, she is still flooded with pain at the knowledge of what has happened to her adopted child. She thinks to herself, a wrong that cannot be repaired must be transcended. While Tanar is visiting town, one of the men responsible for assaulting Theru came by the house, looking for her. Terrified, Theru hid and is only found later when Tanar returns home. When she learns what has happened, that this awful man, this man who hurt her child, has violated the boundaries of Ogion's home and her child's safety, she is furious. Tanar finds out that this man is staying on as a laborer at the manor house of the Lord of Rayalbi. She's planning on paying a visit. Chapter 9. Finding Words. Tanar learns the name of the man who came sneaking into their home, the man who so badly wronged Theru. His name is Handy. She has an encounter with Aspen, the mage of the manor, and one of the mages who attended Ogion's death. Aspen reacts to Tanar with wrath. He is disparaging and distrustful of her words. He calls her a witch and Theru a foul imp that Handy would have been right to destroy. This is not the reception she was expecting, to say the least, and this man, this mage, represents a real threat. Tanar wonders what about her makes him so angry, so afraid. Is it her foreignness, her brushings with power, her womanhood? Something about her and her child infuriates this man. The king's men visiting from Havnor are staying at the manor, and two of them intervene. Aspen's diatribe is diplomatically diffused, but his hatred of Tanar continues to grow. He places a curse on her, one which she feels the effects of later at home. Her thoughts turn to despair, she feels weak and stupid, closed in by a growing darkness. But she manages to cast the curse off, victoriously crying into the night, "You come too late, Aspen. I was eaten long ago. Go clean your own house." I really just love the imagery of Tanar screaming, "Go clean your own house." It's such a good insult, and it's fucking hilarious. I love it. You big scary mage man, bet you never cleaned a toilet. Bet you'd starve if you didn't have someone to cook for you. Cry about it. Go clean your own house. Go clean your own house, loser. Anyways, Tanar and Theru travel to the village together. Someone, perhaps a group of boys, throws stones at them. It seems that her respectability amongst the village folk is declining. Upon returning to Ogion's, she notices that the house has been disturbed. Something is not quite right. She falls victim to another curse Aspen has left waiting for her, and this one she does not manage to dispel. Unable to counter this magery, she knows what she must do. She needs to leave quickly. Tanar packs her and Theru up, and they leave the desecrated house. Slowly, the effects of the curse fade, and Tanar's mind begins to clear. The two of them walk 15 miles to Gonport, arriving safe but tired, and having avoided any further traps possibly lying in wait from Aspen. Inside the city, they are spotted and followed by Handy. He claims to be Theru's father, or uncle, or forget it, the child is his, and he claims Tanar has witched her. Handy grasps Theru's arm, his touch like a brand. Desperately, Tanar flees with Theru in her arms and seeks sanctuary on the docked boat from Havnor. Chapter 10. The Dolphin. King Lebanon, who traveled with Sparrowhawk to the dry land of the dead in the previous book, The Farthest Shore, greets Tanar as she boards his ship. He is in fact here to find Sparrowhawk, but he respects the man's need for time and space after their harrowing journey and his great sacrifice. Although still quite young, Tanar can tell that Lebanon has also been through a lot in his life. She can see the way suffering has marked him, softened his heart, and toughened his resolve. She relates to this. Lebanon is extremely respectful, even reverent to Tanar. He knows who she is, he knows what she has done, and also, he's just a nice young man. He volunteers to take her and Theru to Flint's farm in the Middle Valley, as they cannot risk Aspen's rage by going back to Ogion's house. Lebanon is warm, kind, and gentle with Theru, who has shrunken back into herself, closed herself off for protection after that encounter with Handy. Tanar grieves this harm, this act of violation that has stolen once more her child's joy, happiness, curiosity, will to live. It's so easy, she thinks, with rage. It is so easy for Handy to take the sunlight from her, take the ship and the king and her childhood from her, and it's so hard to give them back. A year I've spent trying to give them back to her, and with one touch, he takes them and throws them away. And what good does it do him? What's his prize? His power? Is power that? An emptiness? Tanar attempts to explain to Lebanon that Handy and Theru's parents raped her and beat her and burned her. These things happen, my lord. These things happen to children. And he keeps following her to get at her. This is one of the only times in the book that what actually happened to Theru as a child is spoken so bluntly. And you know what? It's hard to read. It's hard to look at. Looking at it sideways is always a little easier, but Tanar is right. These things do happen to children. It's awful, it's real, we all have to deal with it. Not looking at it, avoiding it, pretending it doesn't happen, banishing victims so we don't have to acknowledge it. Those are wrongs that compound the wrongs already done. I'll talk about this more in depth in the analysis section, it's just not something I can skim over. An unnamed sailor on board carves a bone dolphin and gives it to an almost unresponsive, fearful Theru. While they travel, Lebanon, Tanar, and a few of the other Masters of Roke who are on board discuss Sparrowhawk and his status as Archmage. The Master Winky tells us about the last meeting of the Masters where they all gathered to choose the next Archmage, but could come to no consensus. The Master Patterner, who speaks cryptically and often in riddles, could only tell them that they needed to find a woman on Gaunt. The Master Windkey assumes this woman, maybe Tanar, maybe not, will help them find the man they are looking for, maybe Sparrowhawk, maybe not, who will be the Archmage. Tanar questions whether this woman on Gaunt might just be the person they're looking for, even if she is a woman, but the Masters are skeptical. The ship arrives at Falmouth, the closest port to Oak Farm. Tanar and Theru disembark and walk to town, where they stay briefly with Tanar's daughter, Apple. Chapter 11. Home. Apple walks Tanar and Theru back to Oak Farm, where they are greeted warmly by their neighbor Lark. Tanar makes Theru her red dress. Slowly, Theru's fear recedes. They are home, they are safe. One night, Handy and a group of men try to break into Oak Farm. Tanar readies herself to fight. Sparrowhawk, who had overheard of the men's plan as he was traveling, sneaks into the fray. He stabs a man with a pitchfork, and the rest scatter. He had been living as a goat herd, and through some twist of luck, came upon Handy and his men discussing going to Oak Farm to punish Tanar and Theru. Theru sleeps through the attack. Sparrowhawk and Tehanu are quite shaken. Chapter 12. Winter. Everyone is dealing with the aftermath of the attack on the farm. Neighbors and villagers hear about it and get involved in both gossip and the righteous pursuit of justice. Sparrowhawk wonders what he could have done in the confrontation if he'd still had his mage powers, but Tehanu gently jests that at least he's useful with a pitchfork. Theru learns of the attack she slept through, as well as the capture of Handy and his men. We all learn that before their capture, these men were responsible for killing the woman traveling with them, the woman who was almost surely Theru's biological mother. Theru and Sparrowhawk study together. She is becoming comfortable with him. They all cook dinner together. Tehanu asks Sparrowhawk to stay at the farm with them for the winter. At this point, there is a genuinely heartwarming sex scene between these two old people who have been building their relationship of trust and love and honest partnership for over 25 years, and I cannot do it justice. Just know that they have hot old people sex and they love each other so much. So much. Tehanu continues to be freaking hilarious, quipping to Sparrowhawk that, "Now you're a man indeed. Stuck another man full of holes first and lain with a woman second. That's the proper order, I suppose." She does not mock his manliness, she rather means to convey that the definition itself is flawed. It's not a weapon or a woman that can make a man, or magery either, or any power. Anything but himself. Tehanu and Sparrowhawk lie in each other's embrace and speak of many things, of power and emptiness, men and women, fear and shame. The three spend the winter together, a newly formed, if non-traditional family unit. Tehanu and Sparrowhawk have much to talk about and many thoughts to share. Here, finally, at this point in their lives, as two old farmers, they meet each other on equal grounds with open hearts. Chapter 13. The Master. Winter passes at Oak Farm and spring is on its way. The imprisoned attackers, most notably amongst them Handy, are taken to Gauntport where they are tried for murder. Tehanu and Theru find it difficult to react to this news with the same satisfaction and self-congratulation as their neighbors. Neither of them are quite sure how they feel about it all. Is it good? Is it just? It's certainly a relief that they are gone, but other than that... Tehanu and Sparrowhawk busy themselves with the perpetual work of running a farm in the springtime. One day, a young man arrives at the gate. It takes Tehanu a moment to realize it is her son, Spark. The ship he has been sailing on was disbanded by the king's men for reasons he is not forthright about. He learns of his father's death and of the two new strangers in his mother's, well, by rights, his, home. His reaction is not enthusiastic. Theru repulses him and he views Sparrowhawk with suspicion. Spark shares the worst of Flint's habits. He expects to be cared for and catered to by his mother, making Tehanu both miserable and embarrassed for what she sees as her failure to raise him. He's grown into a dishonest, envious man, and whatever she thinks makes a good man, he certainly is not representative of it. Sparrowhawk thinks that Spark is not entirely wicked, not a failure of a man, but rather frightened. He's still in a way a boy, a scared child himself, and perhaps there is still time for him to change. Tehanu remembers the restless kid he was, and hopes Sparrowhawk's right. Still, Tehanu and Sparrowhawk are unsettled by the ease with which Spark settles into the role of master of the house. There is no gentle understanding, none of the communication that Tehanu, Theru, and Sparrowhawk have worked so hard to cultivate between them. A messenger arrives to deliver the news that Auntie Moss is ill. She is dying and requests Tenaru's presence. Tehanu, Theru, and Sparrowhawk prepare to return to Ogion's house to visit Auntie Moss. Theru is excited to see her peach tree. Tehanu explains to Spark that they will be leaving in the morning. She shows him his inheritance, wishes him well in his home, and confirms to his absolute bewilderment and dismay that no, she will not be staying to care for him. In the morning, they leave. As they approach Rayalbi and Ogion's farm, Tanar's thoughts become strange and muddled. She's compelled to lead the group not to Ogion's, but to the manor of the Lord of Rayalbi. Unbeknownst to Sparrowhawk or Tanar, Theru silently slips away. The wizard Aspen, who had laid a curse on Tanar, the one that caused her flight to Gauntport, is waiting for them. He brings the full might of his power down upon Sparrowhawk and Tanar, making Tanar crawl in the dirt while he raves about cleansing the world of witches and monsters. Aspen mocks Sparrowhawk, no longer a mage, no longer a man of power, no longer a threat. He brags to Sparrowhawk that his master lives, for Aspen is in truth a follower of the mage Ka, the very mage that Sparrowhawk and Lebanon had traveled to the dry lands, had crossed over into death to defeat, and whom Sparrowhawk had sacrificed all of his wizardry to stop. Aspen has been gathering men like himself, cruel, half-hearted, and power-hungry servants of their master. Gloating with his control over Tanar and Sparrowhawk, Aspen makes them walk, or in Tanar's case, crawl, to the manor house. Tanar's mind is almost completely smothered by the curse. Words lose meaning. All she can do is obey and withstand the violent harassment of Aspen and his followers as they kick and degrade her. Completely satisfied with himself, Aspen begins to plan a fitting death for the two the following morning. Chapter 14. Tehanu. Theru, having slipped away earlier, has avoided capture. She witnessed how Aspen had bound and taken who she refers to as her mother and father. She runs. Seemingly on instinct, she calls out in her mind to the great dragon Kalessin, seeking, needing to save her family. If only she could fly. Theru runs to Auntie Moss's house, passing Ogion's farm on the way. She notices with quiet sadness that her peach tree never grew. The seedling didn't make it. Theru has an uncanny ability to sense people's true names. She knows Aspen's, and upon entering Auntie Moss's, she knows hers as well. Lathe, she calls her. Auntie Moss is not surprised. She is terrified, though, of something else. Auntie Moss has been cursed by Aspen as well, tortured yet kept from true death, in a ruse to lure Tanar and Theru back to Rayalbi. Theru stays at her side and comforts her, explaining in her soft, raspy voice that they must wait for her people to come, and it will be okay. In the morning, Aspen leads a procession of men dragging Tanar and Sparrowhawk across the fields to the cliffs above the sea. Aspen plans to have Sparrowhawk push the incapacitated Tanar over the side, then throw himself over after. As Tanar stands curse-bound and befuddled at the edge of the cliff, she sees something in the sky. Not a bird, much bigger. She speaks the name of the great creature, Kalessin, and the curse shatters. She grabs Sparrowhawk and they crouch down in the dirt as Kalessin roasts the absolute shit out of Aspen and his men. In the language of dragons, the language of the making, Sparrowhawk thanks Kalessin. Kalessin asks where Tehanu is as Theru runs to meet them on the cliff top. She hears Kalessin speak that name, her true name, Tehanu. Theru admits to calling on Kalessin because she didn't know what else to do. She communicates easily, naturally, in the language of the dragons. Kalessin tells her, side note, dragons are beyond gender. They are referred to with titles of respect, such as eldest or with the pronoun it. So Kalessin tells her it has been seeking her, and asks if they will now go home. Theru refuses, wanting to stay with Sparrowhawk and Tanar. Kalessin tells them to take care of its child, and that it will come back for her in time, before springing back into the air. Tanar and Sparrowhawk marvel at their child of dragons. She reminds them that Auntie Moss needs help. They leave the cliff top strewn with remains of ash, bone, burnt leather, to attend to Auntie Moss. They send for a healer and finally rest. Theru mourns her peach tree, and Tanar reminds her they can plant many more. Tanar asks Theru if she'd like to live in Ogion's house. She thinks it's viable with the money she has, her farming skills, and Sparrowhawk's goat herding. The book ends with Tanar thinking about planting beans, imagining the three of them together, and deciding that, yes, we can make a life here. My edition of this book contains an afterword written by Guin detailing her thoughts on Tehanu, the narrative, the process of writing it, and its reception. My first note for this section verbatim says, "God damn, will I ever have a thing to say or thought to think that is as precise and as full of meaning as any sentence Le Guin has written." So yeah, totally not a fan or anything. Anyways, in this section, she discusses how between the publishing of The Farthest Shore and Tehanu, books 3 and 4 of the Earthsea cycle, 18 years passed. Le Guin wanted to tell Tanar's story, but she got stuck. In those 18 years, she lived her own common life. She married, she raised children, she learned things from other women, and then she knew where Tanar's journey led. Reviewers at the time expressed disappointment with the book, as it is very much not a traditional heroic fantasy. Le Guin remarks that fantasy, even the ones with women protagonists, were and mostly remain based on institutions, hierarchies, and values constructed by men. Tehanu, in contrast, is all about women and children to start with. In her own words, Tehanu is not a hero tale. I didn't want it to be. By the time I wrote this book, I needed to look at heroics from outside and underneath, from the point of view of the people who are not included, the ones who can't do magic, the ones who don't have shining staffs or swords, women, kids, the poor, the old, the powerless, unheroes, ordinary people, my people. I didn't want to change Earthsea, but I needed to see what Earthsea looked like to us. She also says in the afterword that Theru is the key to the book. Her life has been ruined at the start. She's not just powerless, but crippled, deformed, and terrorized. She cannot be healed. The cruel wrong done to her came with the breakdown of the society of Earthsea, which the new king may be able to repair, but for Theru, what reparation? And here's the crux of the book, that one line that fundamentally shapes the narrative. A wrong that cannot be repaired must be transcended. Theru is the key. There's definitely a lot more packed into this afterword that is worth reading, but I'm trying so hard to refrain from just reading you this whole thing. We'll talk about it more as it comes up in regards to thematic analysis in a moment. Please commend my restraint. When I finished the book, I wanted to get my initial feelings down right away. Sort of like how right before I began reading it, I took some notes. So upon finishing, I cracked open my laptop and went to town. The first thing I wrote to describe it was, so comforting, so soothing, just this balm for the heartache of living. And you know what? Corny, but I stand by it. Le Guin does not shy away from suffering. She holds your hand as you look directly at it and then helps you cook a good meal. She sticks around to help with the dishes, too. I still find it hard to describe the emotional impact of this book and much of Le Guin's writing. There's an authenticity, a clarity, a simplicity, a curiosity, a kindness, this sort of unshakable self-knowledge she exhibits as she writes about these worlds and explores the lives of the characters living in it. It rings true to me. A clarion bell singing, listen, listen, there's wisdom here. I often feel like I'll never be able to fully digest that wisdom, and I struggle to express it here. What is it that means so much to me? I love Tanar dearly. What a character, what a woman, what a wonderful protagonist. I love Theru. I see my frightened child self in her, and I feel catharsis watching her transcend the wrongs done to her. Also, I enjoy when men who abuse their power get roasted alive by dragons. That's nice. I love Sparrowhawk. I feel his shame with him and slowly walk his path towards acceptance after losing that which he thought was him. Their happiness together, the three of them, fills me with warmth. When I think of love, it has been shaped by relationships like these. The quiet trust, vulnerability, the doing. Tanar, Theru, and Sparrowhawk are always partners in their domestic life. No one is a servant, no one is expected to obey, no one wields their power over any other. Instead, mutuality, respect, fondness, the desire for those you love to flourish. I'm going to go on yet another Ursula tangent, but bear with me. In another of her novels, The Lathe of Heaven, she writes, "Love doesn't just sit there like a stone. It has to be made, like bread, remade all the time, made new." I've literally read this quote out loud to my therapist and also my partner. This philosophy that love is an action that we choose to do, overwhelming. And that's where this book hits me. Whatever world we live in, whatever wrongs have been done to us, whatever fear creeps into our hearts, there remains the choice to love, to choose again and again, to make it like bread, to do that which is life-affirming for yourself and others. All right, now I'd like to get into a little bit deeper analysis. This is definitely me rambling, and I will try to structure it as best as I can, but this is Baby's first video essay, and you know what? We're gonna be a little messy. That's okay. First, I want to talk about the way gender is portrayed in this book and the thematic background of Le Guin's very Taoist-influenced exploration of non-dualism. Le Guin frequently cited the Tao Te Ching, a fundamental Taoist text, as a formative and lifelong influence on her personal ethos and writing. Non-dualism is a religious and philosophical concept shared between several different traditions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, none of which I am an expert on, so take all of this with several grains of salt. The philosophy Le Guin draws from questions the arbitrary separations we set up between things, the boundaries we impose to understand ourselves and the world around us. Taoism in particular, all right, hold on, everyone, we're going to do my one allotted Wikipedia citation here. Taoism in particular embodies non-dualism by emphasizing the harmony and interconnectedness of all phenomena, transcending dualistic distinctions towards a pure, non-dual state of awareness. Gender in Tehanu is a false dichotomy, an arbitrary separation that must be transcended in order to attain freedom. Think of the dragons, the first beings, the most powerful creatures in Earthsea, and the only ones who speak the language of the making. They're beyond gender. They've already done the transcending. We've just gotten a little lost along the way. This book brings the binary between the categories of man, woman into sharp focus. What is a man? What is a woman? What happens to the people who don't fit into these discrete categories? And there's so much room here for discussion of queerness, of transness, non-binariness, that Le Guin does not ever have. It's like the discussion I'd want to have with her if we ever had coffee together, you know? To me, at least, it doesn't feel like a purposeful omission, a decision to leave queerness out, but in making space for the complexity beyond the dichotomy of man-woman, queerness just kind of fills the void, you know? And, you know, maybe in 1990 when this was published, when she was writing it, that wasn't exactly what she was working through, but this book really spoke to me on a certain gendery level, and the older I get, I keep coming back to it, finding more to think about. I find Tanar particularly interesting and relatable, like really relatable. And I think there's a degree to which Le Guin related to Tanar and maybe even poured some of her own experiences into the character. To go on yet another Ursula tangent, there's a short essay Le Guin wrote in 1992 titled Introducing Myself, which was later published along with other nonfiction pieces in the book The Wave in the Mind in 2004. Introducing Myself is a brilliant performance. It is just punch after punch of sarcasm, wit, and the finely honed anger of being told one too many times that it's a man's world. It begins with the line, "I am a man." "All right, Le Guin, we were off to a good start. Tell me more." She continues, "Now you may think I've made some kind of silly mistake about gender, or maybe that I'm trying to fool you. I am a man, and I want you to believe and accept this as fact, just as I did for many years." To me, this perks my ears right up and my brain asks, trans? However, this is not where I believe Le Guin was going here. To the best of my knowledge, she identified as a woman and lived her life publicly as a woman, one who thought very deeply and critically about this whole gender thing. In Introducing Myself, she's skewering masculinity, the societal setting of man as default. And I think she does it in a really interesting way that manages to avoid the trap of radical feminism and transphobia. Le Guin was not interested in upholding the rigid gender binary. She's really quite against rigid binaries in general. It's like, definitely her whole thing. Le Guin was a woman writing sci-fi and fantasy, the disparaged genre fiction, as early as the 60s. Her field was male-dominated, her chosen storytelling method disrespected, and she was well aware that most of her fellow writers thought she ought to be at home raising children. Which, by the way, she also did. With her husband, Charles, who she frequently mentions in writings and interviews was her partner, a co-parent and equal bearer of the load of homemaking and child rearing. To me, it seems like Le Guin found the role of woman restrictive. Not that she didn't consider herself to be a woman, but that the category produced artificial, arbitrary limits for her. She continues in this essay, "We have been told that there is only one kind of people, and they are men. I'm really lousy at being people. I don't have a gun, and I don't have even one wife, and my sentences tend to go on and on and on with all this syntax in them." Just this absurd parade of manhood and masculinity. Not even one wife, Ursula? For shame. "I really did try," she concludes. "I tried hard to be a man, to be a good man, and I see how I failed at that. I am at best a bad man, an imitation phony second-rate him with a 10-hair beard and semicolons, and I wonder what was the use. Sometimes I think I might just as well give the whole thing up. If I'm no good at pretending to be a man and no good at pretending to be young, I might just as well start pretending that I am an old woman. I'm not sure that anybody has invented old women yet, but it might be worth trying." Even here, at the end, Le Guin introduces herself as pretending to be an old woman. She clearly had a very anthropological understanding of the construction of sex and gender, a la Judith Butler, which tracks because Butler's highly influential Gender Trouble was published in 1990, and they go hard into the idea of gender as performance. As contemporaries in this time, I believe both of them were engaged in similar veins of feminist theory. Both authors utilize a sort of barbed playfulness to engage with the topic of gender, and they encourage the reader to join in that play. The trouble in Butler's Gender Trouble was trouble they believed we should cause. That gender is a hegemonic category that requires destabilization through means such as drag performance, play, and exploration in order to transcend it. Le Guin is doing just that in Introducing Myself, performing, playing, destabilizing. I think it's really effective. I also want to draw attention to the connection she makes between age and gender. Throughout this piece, man is the permanent default, the every human category. Woman is marked. Woman has attached signifiers like youth and thinness and beauty. When you lack these signifiers, when you are old or fat or ugly, Are you expelled from the category of woman? Guin takes a solid strike at the heart of ageism when she writes that she's not sure anybody has invented old woman yet. The category woman is not compatible with the category old. The box is too small. The language is too limiting. But maybe we should play around with it, see what happens. Maybe write a fantasy story where the main character is a fucking cool old lady, I don't know. By the way, I highly recommend reading Introducing Myself. It is short and super worth it, and I will put a link to a PDF below. I find this perspective on gender interesting and relatable in a way I struggle to fully understand or comprehend. There's this sort of, I'm not sure how to explain it, but I'll try. So, me. I'm like a person. I'm just this like creature, going about my creation. But the society I live in looked at me and decided that based on the visible characteristics of my body, I must fit into a certain category and be expected to do certain things. So when I continue my creating, society is like, dude, what the hell? We put you in the woman box. What are you doing? Or sometimes they're like, yeah, we just stick it to the man, lady. And I'm like, I just want to creech. It's not like I want to jump into the man box either. I just want to do my thing and interact as a person, creature, interacting with other people, sometimes creatures. And like, I can wear my little they them pin at work, but it doesn't change the way cis men will call me sweetheart or act distressed when I carry heavy objects in front of them. Against my will, I'm in the category of woman, and it chafes my dudes. I want to explode the category and hit all the little leftover pieces with hammers until all that remains is a fine dust that blows away in the wind. I don't think that women are bad, and I'm certainly not ashamed to be associated with them, but I do think that the binary nature of the man-woman categories encourages simplistic oppositional thinking. If men are one thing, women must be the opposite. Men have to be something first so women can even be. The standard patriarchal baseline is men are good and strong and right, and that women are bad and weak and wrong. We've come a little farther than that in most cases, and sometimes we even attempt to subvert that line of logic by changing it around. Women are good and strong and right, and men are bad and weak and wrong. And while it can feel good to have a shred of praise thrown at you when you've mostly been shat on by the patriarchy, it's not actually solving any of the root problems this dichotomy causes. I think that what Guin gets at, particularly through discussions of duality and Tehanu, that strikes such a chord with me gender-wise, is that she really shows how we have these arbitrary systems of separating people into categories. These categories are often oppositional, frequently alienating, and promote fear and misunderstanding. Beyond these categories lies the infinite complexity of human experience. There is more nuance than the categories man and woman could ever hold. And when you force everyone to assimilate to one or the other, you lose so much. You lose connection, self-discovery, acceptance, excitement, so many new possibilities and perspectives. In reading Tehanu, we see Tanara experience the frustration and anger running into the limits of category woman, similar to the frustration Guin herself expresses in Introducing Myself. Both the woman and the character she wrote express their exasperation with not being a man, but not being a very good woman either. Being kind of a failure at both. Tanara is a character between these two worlds. As priestess of the tombs of Atuan, or foreign ward of the Mage of Gaunt, she was set apart, set above. Men had given her power, men had shared their power with her. Women looked at her from outside, sometimes rivalrous, often with a trace of ridicule. She had turned her back on all that, gone to the other side, the other room, where the women lived, to be one of them. She experiences the absurdity of women's power and knowledge being frequently dismissed and cast off to the side, despite its often life-saving and life-maintaining effects. She also experiences the absurdity of men's power and knowledge being so heavily gate-kept, while also considered to be infallible, universal, and objectively good, despite the violence she witnesses and experiences at the hands of men. She has not been allowed to live in both rooms at once. Whichever side she chooses, and the world has made her choose, she is looked at from the other with suspicion and fear. Having chosen to throw her lot in with a woman at this point in her life, she definitely finds deep meaning and appreciation in the community she has found there. These are things she was previously barred from. However, she cannot escape the feeling that there is something missing, something right and yet not altogether right about this whole situation. In the world of Earthsea, the women who do magic are witches. They do the lowly jobs of finding and mending and bone setting, take care of the dead, act as midwives, utilize herbal knowledge to make medicine and potions, and many other trivial things. Men who do magic are mages, wizards, and sorcerers. They are formally educated at the College of Roke and hold positions of power all across the archipelago. There's actually a common Gauntish phrase we hear a few times throughout the series: weak as women's magic, wicked as women's magic, which highlights the relationship of domination and fear between men and women. Witches are to be considered with caution, even though their magic is considered to be lesser than that of mages. They can heal or harm, but lack the expertise and formal education of their male counterparts. The power of witches is seen as somehow more wild, and in that wildness, more mysterious, tricky, and dangerous. Witches are to be feared, unless you need help, and mages are to be revered. We also see the fear from the other side of this perspective by spending a lot of time with the witch Auntie Moss. Auntie Moss finds a lot of comfort in the ideas of divine feminine power. During a conversation with Dinar, she explains that a man gives out, dearie. A woman takes in. Ours is only a little power, seems like, next to theirs, but it goes down deep. It's all roots. It's like an old blackberry thicket, and a wizard's power is like a fir tree, maybe. Great and tall and grand, but it'll blow right down in a storm. Nothing kills a blackberry bramble. In Auntie Moss's metaphor, men have the sky and the light, and women have the earth and the dark. Still an unequal partnership, but one she can find secret pride in. To her, women's power is enigmatic, pouring up from the depths, unknown, unknowable, unbreakable. Who knows where a woman begins and ends, she asks. Men's power is grand, yes, but that's all it is. It's known, up there in the light, and it's vulnerable. That ego, that pride, that power, it's vulnerable in a way Moss is not. She's a creature of the depths, of the dark, of the earth. What does she have to fear about falling? Who dares ask questions of the dark, she challenges. Who will ask the dark its name? To Moss, this is why men have treated her so poorly. They fear that fall themselves. They fear the dark. This framework allows her to make her own sort of peace with the bottom rung of the hierarchy she finds herself on. Her discussions of women's power in the book are honestly quite captivating. They make sense. I know people who would agree with her. Le Guin even says in the afterword that Moss is pretty contemptuous of men in general, having been treated by them with contempt all her life. That's alright, and I find her discussion of men's power and women's power harsh, incomplete, but interesting. Auntie Moss has doubled down on the binary here in her desire to grapple with its unfairness. She's entrenched herself further into these arbitrary categories, and her character really exemplifies the seductiveness of this choice. She's already in the box. Why shouldn't she reclaim every negative thing associated with it? The other box is going to fear and hate her regardless. And you know what? That other box, they don't understand anything at all. Everyone in her box is actually the greatest and secretly the most special, and that's why the other box is so awful to them. Truthfully, I can see the appeal. And I've definitely been in that headspace. It's a combative self-defense mechanism. It may not be the most productive way of thinking, but it certainly is a good way to stay safe. And when you've been hurt in the way that Auntie Moss has, staying safe is often the clear priority. Tanar listens thoughtfully whenever Auntie Moss shares her thoughts on men, women, magic, and power. She's never quite on board, though. When Auntie Moss fervently demands, "Who dares ask questions of the dark? Who will ask the dark its name?" Tanar simply responds without much fanfare, "I will. I lived long enough in the dark." Tanar seeks to move beyond these categories. They hurt her, and she can see the harm they cause to people like Auntie Moss even as she seeks refuge within them. Tanar doesn't want either or. She wants wholeness. She wants understanding. Sparrowhawk also fumbles his assigned gender role. He had achieved its pinnacle, the archmage of the College of Roke, an adult man at the height of his power, and then he gave it away. Botched his performance in the last act to become no longer a man, but an embarrassment. Aspen openly jeers at him during their final encounter. What a funny sight to see, the great archmage all got up like a goat herd and not an ounce of magic in him, not a word of power. Can you say a spell, archmage? Just a little spell, just a tiny charm of illusion? No, not a word? My master defeated you. Now do you know it? You did not conquer him. His power lives. Aspen cruelly ridicules Sparrowhawk in a speech meant to strip away the remaining credibility of his masculinity. His power, his title, his victory, gone. A failure. Sparrowhawk gave his magic away, and yeah, he sulked and grieved for a while, but after that, he didn't go hunting for more means of wielding power. He learned who he was without, that it was not the entirety of what made him him, and that really much of that power, having that authority over creation itself, stunted his growth as a man, as a person, in many ways. Le Guin remarks again in the afterword that some readers who identified with Sparrowhawk as a male power figure thought I'd betrayed and degraded him in some sort of feminist spasm of revenge. So far as I know, I had no spasms and didn't betray him. Quite the opposite, I think. In Tehanu, he can become finally, fully a man. He is no longer the servant of his power. We see he has failed by Aspen's standards, his station demoted from archmage to goatherd, but why should he be using Aspen's standards to judge himself by? Aspen's full-throttle acceptance of what it should mean to be a powerful man causes nothing but suffering and harm. It alienates him, provokes him to fury and rage at Tanar and Theru's mere existence, and fills him with so much disdain for Sparrowhawk that he plans to murder him. It is misery that produces more misery, and he lives and dies in fear of any challenge to his manly power. Both Tanar and Sparrowhawk struggle to perform their gender roles, roles that reflect back at us from Earthsea through a sort of funhouse mirror. Magical and fantastic, yes, but still relatable. There is this impossible gulf created by this gender divide that somehow, through their failures to adhere to it, these two characters manage to bridge. And those who don't quite bridge that gap, like Auntie Moss, are not mocked by the narrative, but treated with understanding. Even Aspen, with his malicious intent, has clear motivations that are narratively coherent. He has power, and he wants to keep it forever. The existence of this vast gulf between men and women is not anyone's personal failing. It's an arbitrary separation of people. It's a societal invention that everyone must find a way to navigate. In addition to the examination of gender, Tehanu also concerns itself greatly with power and what it means. What is power? How does it function? What is its purpose? If it is to mean only relationships of domination, of exerting one's will over others, then what use does it serve? Whom does it serve? Some, surely. Some who will fight to keep it, to retain control and remain at the top of the hierarchy. In this perspective, power, much like gender, requires an underclass. Those who have it and those who don't. Those who dominate and those who serve. Tehanu asks us, what else could power mean? If it meant trust, if it meant the freedom to neither dominate nor be dominated, what is there beyond the confines of this dichotomy? Le Guin definitely draws inspiration from her noted affinity for anarchism here. As we recently discussed, there's a parallel between the character arcs of Sparrowhawk and Tanar over the course of their lives. Both have great power, and both relinquish it. Sparrowhawk is a powerful mage from birth. He is sent to Roke for formal training, and quickly ascends to the top of the hierarchy as Archmage. Tanar is chosen as a child to become the priestess of the tombs of Atuan. It is both a powerful status and a powerful shackle. Sparrowhawk willingly gives up his wizardry in the events of the previous book, pouring every last bit of his power out. He takes this drastic measure in order to end the terrors of the Mage Cobb, whose actions Sparrowhawk is partially responsible for. Sparrowhawk believes this act will kill him. It doesn't. He returns to life, where he must grapple with his loss. Tanar escapes the tombs, is welcomed into the world of men's magic by Sparrowhawk and his mentor Ogion. Not content to remain there, however, she leaves that world behind to marry and raise children. Although their routes are different, both characters go through these extremes, experiencing what it is like to be both powerful and powerless. In their old age, they are made to directly confront their relationship to power, to reckon with their ability to wield power over others, and to reckon with those who wield power over them. Ultimately, both Tanar and Sparrowhawk are quite powerless in the traditional sense. Theru and Kalessin are the ones who save the day. But Tehanu is not a traditional story with a traditional protagonist or hero. Our characters seek more. Tanar remembers how she was raised, taught that to be powerful she must sacrifice herself and others, to bargain, give, and so get. But at the other side of that journey, after years of life lived in between, she says, my soul can't live in that narrow place, this for that, tooth for tooth, death for life. There is a freedom beyond that, beyond payment, retribution, redemption, beyond all the bargains and the balances. There is freedom. Sparrowhawk begins to think of his emptiness, his lack of power, as a potential to become something else. Theru plans to plant more peach trees. Le Guin writes that the change coming over Earthsea we see at the end of the novel has something to do with no longer identifying freedom with power, with separating being free from being in control. That there is a kind of refusal to serve power that isn't a revolt or a rebellion, but a revolution in the sense of reversing meanings, of changing how things are understood. Le Guin was, as far as I'm aware, always quite open about her affinity for anarchism and its influence on her writing. Her 1974 sci-fi novel, The Dispossessed, is widely considered to be the anarchist book, and I happen to quite like it. Go read it, it's amazing. But there's something running through Tehanu, published 16 years later in 1990, that hits me in a different way. Its discussions of power, abuse, and domination play out on a smaller, more intimate scale. Its characters and heroes are common folk, children, and the elderly. We see the harm done to them, and we see them struggle to imagine better. How can we make a life worth living when we suffer so much, when so much harm is done? And Tehanu answers, well, we're gonna have to start by planting some beans together. And it's not a straightforward answer, no, but I do believe that to be on purpose. The way that Guin attempts to get at these answers sideways helps us imagine alternatives to our current reality. It creates spaces for what could be, very much reflecting anarchist philosophy and prefigurative politics. In this section, I am going to be citing heavily from the work of Andrewism, who you can find here on YouTube and also at the Anarchist Library. Links will be provided down below. He is truly an excellent resource if you're interested in learning more about anarchism and decolonization. Please check out and support his work. The way he explains things is just so helpful and hopeful. Andrewism defines anarchism as a political philosophy and movement based in opposition to all forms of hierarchical control and promotion of a society within which individuals can freely cooperate together as equals. The social revolution that anarchists seek requires people transforming society and transforming themselves in the process. It is not a sudden flipping of the switch, but a gradual change in people's powers, drives, and consciousness. Social revolution is an ongoing process, not a singular event. Prefigurative politics is the doing of this work in the present, deliberately implementing these desired future social relations, institutions, infrastructure, and practices in the here and now. To put it simply, it really just means starting to do the things now that we want our world to be. An example of prefigurative politics in action, one you may have even participated in, is mutual aid. Mutual aid is the practice of building and engaging in alternative networks of care, creating ways to get everyone what they need when those needs are not being met by current institutional power structures. In the area where I live, I remember a number of organizations that formed during the height of the pandemic to get people necessities. Masks, medicine, rides, groceries, diapers, and so on. This cooperative effort was made up of, well, people. Like me. Like you, perhaps. Just regular people who decided to participate. And I very much mean participate, not help or give or save everyone. Because the thing is, I was exposed to the kind of precarity at that time that made me have to accept that I needed a lot of help too. I was scared, and the people around me were scared, and we didn't know what was coming next. And you know what? A ton of people experience that precarity every day. They did before the pandemic, and they still do. The point I'd like to make here is that mutual aid is founded on the basis of reciprocity, which, if you've been conditioned to accept being in the role of one who helps or one who needs help, can feel strange. But this framework asks us to question those roles. Why are there certain stigmas attached to needing things and certain honors attached to giving them? There is a vulnerability in admitting both that we're part of a community and that we're not above needing things. The relationship must go both ways. It must flow, resources must be shared, trust must be built. The power generated by mutual aid is that of the collective. It is not oppressive or dominating, but people working together to take care of each other. Maybe you've heard or read the slogans, solidarity, not charity, or we take care of us. Both of these describe the critical point that this work is both reciprocal and liberatory. In this framework, change happens together. In difficult times, it can feel like the social fabric keeping everything together frays. Tehanu takes place in an age where magic is faltering, travel feels dangerous, showing kindness and trust to strangers is risky, and fear seems to permeate the air. The systems in place that provide order have slowed down or ceased to operate entirely. I think, unfortunately, many of us still here in 2024 may be able to deeply relate to that. As I mentioned before, Guin said that Tehanu is the key to the book. A society that can treat a child like Tehanu was treated is broken. Tehanu looks right at that society and condemns it. Says, this is not okay, questions how it was ever allowed to happen in the first place, and lets everyone know that they have had a part in this devastating failure. But Tehanu also tells us that everyone similarly has a part in the repairing of what can be repaired and the transcending of that which can't. I certainly look around the world we live in and feel despair often, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of ways I can see people being failed by the institutions supposed to help us. It can feel pretty bleak. What Le Guin depicts so well in this novel is how an anarchist framework of reciprocity can create the antidotes to hopelessness and alienation. It can repair that which has been fragmented, foster connection, and build community. Tanar can choose to love the burned child, to believe she has a life worth living, to make her a pretty red dress. Theru can choose to trust Tanar, to make a home with her, to learn what it means to be free of fear. This is what we owe each other. Please do not think of it as a burden. It is what we owe each other and what we each deserve. Andrewism explains that this whole effort is an ongoing process to make society more diverse, open, and free, expanding pockets of social change around the world until new examples of what life could be are made known to all. It's about making life worth living. It's about making life worth living for all of us. Tehanu provides us the opportunity to imagine what the process of creating this kind of life could look like. It gives us a window into a world where characters actively explore alternative forms of power through relationships of trust and reciprocity. And this, Le Guin tells us, is where change, where transcendence comes from. You know, planting beans together. Or maybe some peach trees.